scenario, and we had this scenario, and this is what I told Flip. Flip and I got on somebody else one time for doing the same exact thing that Flip did. We taught the other person ass up. Like, yo, fam, you ratted on somebody low-key based on something that you couldn't do that they did. Mind your business. So Flip now could have potentially taken a privilege away from Mark going forward because he pointed out, yo, you let Mark do it, but you ain't let me do it. Now you could now go to Mark and be like, yo, dog, I can't let you do that no more because Flip complained about it. That's now hating on Mark's freedoms and privileges.
All right, listen up, everyone. Hope y'all are doing good today. Now, hold up, because I really wanted to touch on this part since I caught a lot of subtle details while Ish was breaking down what actually went down. First things first, Ish was never just randomly calling Flip about this situation. The only reason that call even happens is because Ish had already been through a very similar moment with Flip before, and he knew that experience would be the only thing that could truly open Flip's eyes to what was really happening. And since Flip was directly involved in that earlier situation, the message was easier for Ish to get across. If that situation with Melissa had never happened between them, there's honestly no real reason for Ish to even make that call to Flip. I just had to clear that part up right away. Now, secondly, and this is where it gets interesting, I always notice that whenever Ish checks one of his co-hosts like this, he instantly pulls up a moment from the past where someone either spoke up or stayed silent, and then he points straight at the contradiction. I'm not gonna lie, it's actually funny watching all of them because every single person up there is constantly studying everyone else's moves like classmates watching each other in class. The reason this situation even makes sense right now is that Flip, you're over here trying to take away privileges that Mark currently has, and that's really the message Ish was trying to deliver. Mark gets to move the way he moves on that show because of the value he brings to the table. And Flip, you of all people should understand that firsthand, because the whole situation with Melissa was literally about you getting more privileges than everybody else on that stage. At least that's how it looked to everyone watching. What's wild to me is that everyone keeps watching each other's movements, but nobody actually pauses to understand why certain people can move differently. Especially when you consider that early on, Flip was the one boosting the entire energy of the JBP. He was putting in extra work by dropping additional content connected to the JBP. He was even reacting on his own channel about what he experienced on the show, which basically meant more visibility, more attention, and way more fan interaction. Flip was also the one who really started breaking that fourth wall, which is the reason fans even interact with the podcast the way they do today. You gotta remember, back when it was Rory, Joe, and Mao, fans would comment on YouTube and Patreon, but nobody was stepping outside of that space to create extra content explaining or debating what happened on the pod. That shift really started once Flip arrived, because he began openly talking about the behind-the-scenes moments from the podcast, which made the audience feel comfortable sharing their own opinions too. So yeah, when you're the person increasing fan engagement like that, you're naturally going to receive certain privileges that other people on that couch simply won't get.
And here's the thing people don't really talk about. A lot of folks watch what's happening before they ever ask questions, meaning they don't even go to Joe directly about the opportunities they think other cast members are getting. Instead, they just see someone else receiving certain perks and instantly assume they were never allowed to do it. Then the doubt creeps in and suddenly it's like, wait, should I actually be mad about this? But even if someone can't get the same privilege, the real question is simple. What exactly are you doing on the show that matches what that person is bringing to the table? Because let's be honest, Flip was the one who originally pushed that entire dynamic. He was the guy who managed to get paid even while suspended. He was the same person who could miss Patreon recording days and still receive payment as if he were physically there. And that right there has always been the core frustration people had with him. Now here's where it gets interesting again. Why can't they look at Mark and recognize he's doing something very similar? He's appearing on Podwise and he's not even bringing his wife into the conversation. He's there strictly to moderate the discussions. He showed up to BTS and immediately brought energy to the room. He pulled up to the Ian and Mark show and helped turn that into an actual program worth watching. He's also part of JBP Rewind. On top of that, whenever the podcast needs to touch on serious or heavier news topics, Mark is usually the one stepping in to deliver that information clearly. He's actually the reason they're even able to have deeper political conversations on the show now. I remember back during the COVID era when they had Dr. Fauci appear, and that moment felt huge. But let's be real, those kinds of discussions were rare back then. It wasn't something you expected every week from them. Now, almost every episode touches on what's happening politically because a lot is going on in the world. And that shift really happened when Mark joined the conversation. So think about it for a second. If I'm doing everything Flip was doing before, and on top of that, I'm adding even more layers to the show, why wouldn't I end up with more privileges? Especially when Mark also brought a completely unexpected energy. When he started speaking about music, I honestly didn't expect that at all. I didn't expect him to crack jokes either. I definitely didn't expect him to blend so naturally into an urban podcast environment, because that wasn't what people knew him for. But somehow he slid right in and made it work. So if someone is doing all of that and contributing even more than what came before, why would they not receive extra privileges compared to everyone else sitting there? And let's be honest for a second. It's not like most of the cast have young kids they're responsible for bringing around, as Mark does. Ice does have a daughter, that's true, but Ice doesn't have sole or primary custody in the way Mark does with his son being around the set.
And another thing people conveniently forget is the issue of missing episodes, because if we're being fair, Flip has missed plenty of recordings himself, which is exactly why when Melissa started criticizing Flip for his behavior, part of me felt like she should have taken a moment to reflect and ask herself a serious question. What exactly am I bringing to this podcast? But at the same time, I understand why that conversation gets complicated, because it looks like Joe's current strategy is something very different. Bringing Sasha back while still keeping Mona around almost feels like he's trying to split one role into two. Mona seems positioned to become the voice Joe originally hoped Melissa would represent. Meanwhile, Sasha appears to fill the visual presence and personality Joe wanted from Melissa on screen. In other words, it almost feels like two different women are being used to replace one position. And let's be real about one more thing. I truly don't think Joe ever imagined a situation where Melissa Ford wouldn't come back to the podcast at all. Now, I'll give her credit where it's due. It's not like she left and suddenly went to her own podcast and started going crazy with huge numbers. The viewership on her platform is honestly still around the same small level it was when she was appearing over here. But at some point, she clearly decided, yeah, I'm not dealing with this anymore. And here's the crazy part. If she had just given a little more to the show, listen to this. Even if it was just one moment where she opened up about her video vixen era, just once, she probably would have gotten the same privileges she felt Flip was receiving. Because let's keep it real for a second. Melissa was often missing time from the podcast anyway. She'd be out shooting movies, traveling, or handling other projects outside of the show. And that's exactly why whenever she came back, the cast would start asking questions about what she had been doing. Were you actually working, or were you out vacationing while still expecting to get paid? Now, if her frustration came from not being paid during the time she was gone, that's a completely different conversation altogether. But once again, the real question stays the same.
What exactly are you contributing to the show to justify those extra privileges? And if you're sitting there watching the privileges I'm getting, hopefully you're also paying attention to the amount of work I'm putting in. Because if you really want those same benefits, the obvious move would be to step up your effort too. But let's be honest, we already know that's probably not going to happen. That's not what most of them are focused on. Instead, they're just watching each other. And when I say this whole situation feels like high school all over again, I truly mean that. I compare so many situations in life to high school dynamics. People always say, why are you still bringing up high school? And honestly, I couldn't care less about high school itself. But if you really look at workplaces, social groups, sports teams, or even friend circles, you start noticing the same behaviors repeating. All that petty stuff we saw back then still shows up in adult life. And this entire cast sometimes moves exactly like a group of high school students. Everybody's watching their friends and their peers. Then someone runs off to complain to the boss. But here's the ironic part. Joe is the one setting these rules in the first place. So why would you run to him about it? Except here's the twist. They're actually not running to him at all. That's why every time Joe hears people talking about situations behind the scenes, he gets irritated immediately.
I can almost guarantee he wasn't happy hearing that Ish and Flip were having private conversations about this, because the last thing he wants is people teaming up and trying to maneuver their way into extra money or leverage. Trust me, that topic alone might be my next Patreon breakdown. I already went back and checked some old clips, and the receipts are interesting. Now, today's situation was easy to explain because there was a clip floating around that showed exactly what happened. But this kind of dynamic happens way more often than people think. Everyone on that set is constantly watching everyone else's moves. At one point, Ice even had to shut things down when people were getting on Flip about missing podcasts and only showing up once a week, because Flip quickly turned around and basically said, "Yeah, okay, but I'm probably still getting paid more than you anyway." Now, I want to hear from y'all. Maybe I'm tripping like usual. Is this actually a big deal? Is it something fans should even care about? Or is this just normal behind-the-scenes drama that happens all the time? Maybe it's one of those situations where you just shrug your shoulders and keep moving. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you made it this far, make sure you subscribe to the channel.